Hey, welcome to Redspin Sports, weekly sports roundup. We are super thrilled to be joined. Chuck Modi, we got to talk a little bit about an article in particular, but huge fan of all your stuff. We're just happy to have you on, man. It's
Thanks.
an absolute honor.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Honestly, I still think the big story of the week that want to get your thoughts on is what happened with the Supreme Court and the decision that they made. We can go right into that. I would absolutely love to hear your take on this and kind of this moment that we're at. What kind of step it was and where we still need to go.
Right. Well, listen, it's a positive step. It's an absolute positive step. And, to my understanding, listen, I'm not a lawyer here, and it's a little murky, but to my understanding, now you could have educational compensation. You could have a form of compensation. And while there are limits to that compensation, two things. One, you could utilize, you're opening the door. You're starting a gateway. So for me, it's not so much, well, where are the limits of whatever educational compensation means. It's what's the next step. So it seems that we're going in the right direction. And the most shocking part of it, which shouldn't be shocking, is that it was a 9-0 decision. And you had some very strong words from like your good friend, Brett Kavanaugh, right? and who is slamming the NCAA. And how bad do you have to be for the likes of Brett Kavanaugh and Clarence Thomas to be talking against you? I mean, how corrupt a system does one have to have? And you would think conservative judges would actually be on board with what Kavanaugh said for a long time, because if you're supposedly a free market capitalist, it would appall you that someone is over 18, is generating billions of dollars and not getting compensated for that. And maybe that did strike a chord somewhere in there. It's quite possible. But I see it as very positive because I think the doors are opening, and there are going to be more doors after this precedent.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in real quick here, Justin. I think one thing that's interesting, and I kind of asked Chuck's take on this too, is that I think there's like actual different rationales for like why the justices of the court went the way they did. You have you can look at the conservative justices, and you can take it and like look at it in sort of like a libertarian lens, like, oh, this is exploitation and whatnot, it's bad. But you look back, and what's interesting, this is a huge contradiction, is it's actually been liberal justices a lot that have upheld this notion of like, oh, we don't want to there's something romantic and, charming about, playing for your school and your buddies, and it's not corrupted by all the big money of big sports. And you had that held up. I mean, this goes back to 1984, really, with the Oklahoma case that really opened the door for revenue coming in, and the TV deals. It took away the NCAA's monopoly over television rights. And that really is where we are. That was the watershed decision that led us to this point. I don't know, but I do think so you have the liberal justices, I think, deciding it on the grounds of like, oh, it's kind of like it's exploitation, all that kind of stuff. But I also think we'd be remiss to ignore this aspect of it, that there's been on social issues, the NCAA is like taking a strong stance against not having tournaments in Mississippi until they changed their flag, and South Carolina until they took the flag down, Confederate battle flag, that is. And you also had issues where the NCAA has, taken stances on social issues that the right wing deems like, to be like woke politics and stuff. And I think there's an element of right wing discourse, and don't fool ourselves. Brett Kavanaugh and that little crew are definitely attuned to what's going on. Girls basketball coach, high school basketball, what is it? Brett Kavanaugh, I think, girls youth basketball coach. Brett Kavanaugh is definitely attuned to what's going on in that space. So to act as if like somehow there's not a little bit of the right wing enjoying the chance to kind of take a shot at the NCAA, it really speaks to what Chuck just said. Like the NCAA angered like every element you could have within the ruling class, essentially. The liberals looked at it, and now we've had that pushing, oh, the NCAA is exploitative. Look at what it's doing, which it is, right? That should be the argument. But it also is pissed off the right wing by kind of, making, quote unquote, embracing like woke politics, whatever that means. It just means that they've just basically put out some like decent statements. It should be like common sense to any decent person, but it's stuff that really pisses off right wingers. So it's sort of a perfect storm. And the NCAA is just in a position where all they can hang their hat on is tradition. And they literally argue. I mean, it's just laughable. Their argument is that the reason people love college football, college basketball, is that it's like not corrupted, right? It's not tainted. As if like, no, it is tainted. You just don't want them to profit. You enjoy the experience of watching free labor and thinking that because of the power dynamics that provides you with. Whereas you watch the NBA game, it's like you got to deal with dudes that got nicer cars than you, nicer houses, nicer portfolios than you got. And to like the white ego of a settler colonial country and the fans that sort of make up the fan base of that, that's something I think that like the power dynamics. I mean, growing up in the South, I'll be quiet in a second, but just you look at SEC football and going to these stadiums and stuff like I did growing up and playing Division I college football myself. And you realize like very clearly that like there is the racial dynamics are just inescapable. And like and it harkens back, and especially in a place like Ole Miss, where like it's like Colonel Rebel, the Grove, like the unpaid labor, the fact that it's just a joke that they're like these guys, you're literally mercenaries. You're cut off, you live in your own bubble kind of. And it's sort of like it reminds me kind of like William Faulkner novels. You go, it's like the ruling class of the South handpicking their predominantly black teams to settle their own scores, with each other. Think Alabama, Auburn, so many other examples. So
if you want to go if you want to go a little further on that analogy, if you go back to the late 1800s, when one of the greatest of the three sports was, I think it was baseball, boxing, and horse racing, the Kentucky Derby, 13 of the 15 jockeys were black. And people don't remember that. And this is, and because I say that, because some idiots always come at me and say, the NFL is 70% black. How can they be racist? Right? And I'm like, oh my God. Well, the 13 of the 15 original Kentucky Derby jockeys were black. And I'm pretty sure there was racism back in the 1800s. So Chuck, yeah.
No, I'm sorry. Yeah, Bill Roden, with the $40 million slaves.
He talks about that, yeah.
Yeah, the jockey syndrome, right? How they just changed the rules, right? And maybe you could talk about that. That's like a good transition, actually. But just like, how did you get into sports journalism? And then also, since we kind of hit on that analogy, I think it's also maybe it connects to Kaepernick, Eric Reed, who I think I appreciate. I went back and saw you with on I Mix What I Like back last year. I think you were talking about that. I appreciate it because, look, Kaepernick deserves to be talked about. But sometimes with, like, movements, it becomes like we just get so obsessed with just, like, one person that we forget that it's not just about one person, right? And Eric Reed is someone that led the NFL. I mean, it was, in the top – I think it was second in the league in tackles, in 2015, right? And then, can't get a job. And then also the kind of – I'm also curious, tied on there's multiple questions here, but with Kaepernick – because that question, and that would relate to Eric Reed, and then also the larger question we're just kind of talking about with the jockey syndrome, as Roden calls it, and the way that the ruling class and race plays, they're able to change the rules essentially when people start succeeding, and they feel threatened, that but with Kaepernick, is it so much? We know that collusion is still going on, but how much more respect do you have for Cap and that? He could probably get back into league if he's willing to do it on their terms. But the fact that he's like, no, I'm not just going to come back and play like under any circumstances and like sign away my rights, sign away like what's right. No. I'm not going to come in and just be your stooge, right? I think that I would argue that kind of adds to the legend of Kaepernick and only makes it bigger and makes the stakes bigger. But just kind of curious what your thoughts are.
Kaepernick absolutely wants to play. He's still waking up every day at 5 a.m. He's a workout nut. And he really, really wants to play, but he's not going to cave and swallow his words to play. He's not going to stop talking about racial justice. He's about to put out a book on abolition, okay? A pro athlete is putting out a book and a collection of essays on abolition, many that you may have seen online, about abolishing the police and abolishing prisons. This is not somebody who is going to swallow his words. But you know what? Why should he have to swallow his words? He shouldn't have to.
Yeah.
What I always remind people is collusion is still going on. And because collusion is still going on, now add Eric Reed since last year. Now, possibly, I don't know if Kenny Stills was signed yet. We could be adding, this list could be growing. Right. It's illegal. It's a crime. So when I get people telling me, well, an employer has the right. Actually, no, not in the NFL. An employer does not have the right. And if you really want to go back in history, that about collusion, if you go back pre Jackie Robinson breaking the color line, a lot of people think to this day that there was a ban in baseball, but there actually was no formal ban. There was no formal ban. If you went to the Commissioner Landis says there's no rule against signing black players. If Negro players want to play, the owner is free to sign them. And you know what the sports media said at that time? The sports media said, the Sporting News, the ESPN of its day said, there is not a black player around who could make the grade in Major League Baseball. Yeah. And this is while barnstorming was going on and Satchel Paige was striking out everybody, right?
Yeah.
So if you go into history, there are two things that are true anytime there's collusion. One is the owners deny it. And two is the larger media, mainstream white media, I have to say white media, will back the owners, because there was a vigorous black press back in the 40s and 30s who were arguing against the color line and fighting against it. So that's what it, that's what it is. And I see the same with Kaepernick. And I think we can never forget that, because we stop using the language. Anytime a sports outlet refuses to list him as a free agent, that sports outlet is complicit in that collusion. So to me, we're seeing the same thing, and we have to frame it what it is, a crime. Right, no doubt. And then let's just add to that Kenny Stills with his Palestine activism. Like it's certainly heroic for our perspective, right on the left, is not going to help him with NFL owners. To me, like that's the thing. We all know it. You're right. Cap hasn't given up on wanting to play, but I think it just adds to it that where you hear the Stephen A. Smiths of the world, almost mad that, oh, how dare you flush away an opportunity? You know how many black guys that haven't had, they had opportunity and you're not taking it. No, Kaepernick is not going to sit there. He wants to play, like you said. But I think part of what makes him more heroic in my book is that he's not just going to sign a paper, right, on a workout. That literally you're going to sign away your rights, which I think you said on the broadcast, and I totally agree with it. It was literally a design, a ploy by Goodell to get them to set this up and then be able to, if he denied it, if he signed it, great, they got him to sign it. If he denies it, then we can use our PR attack dogs and the corporate press, like you mentioned, Stephen A., ESPN, we can name a bunch of names, the Skip Bayless of the world, whoever, and let them go out and attack him for flushing away an opportunity, how ungrateful he is. And I wanted to ask you that. What do you think of the whole being grateful discourse, maybe, and how what role that plays in repressing the ability of athletes to organize? It's the media and their role in perpetrating that narrative that fans expect athletes to be grateful, to be humble. When it to me, it portrays an idea that they somehow are being given something, right? As opposed to what they earned. And I was just kind of curious if you've seen that, how you've encountered maybe that kind of discourse. Of course you see it, and no one experiences that worse than the black athletes, and we see that in our original discussion on the NCAA. You should be grateful they're giving you a free education. Free education. They're generating billions. And when you look at who generates the billions in NCAA, 60% of the revenue comes from basketball and football, the two black-dominated sports. And then they're making Nick Saban rich at $9 million a year. All of his assistant coaches are millionaires, to say nothing about the athletic department. So everybody's making money except the players, and particularly the black players, because they're not doing this in other sports. And so this is an extension of that dynamic. It's you should be grateful, not you generated this revenue. What I find very interesting is nobody ever has that same analysis. Those who critique the black athlete or athletes in general don't have that same analysis for owners who are only millionaires because their parents were billionaires or only billionaires. Nobody says to Hank Steinbrenner or the Steinbrenner sons, wow, you know what I mean? How spoiled rotten they are. They just got these billions of dollars. So when I don't see an analysis like that for the billionaires, then I have to question what's in your brain. I have to question, is racism at work? Is that tied to a certain classism? What's going on there? Because you're just a little too much hypocrisy here, because I don't hear you talking about these other people. And when you want to talk about ESPN carrying water for the NFL, and that's what they do, there's a corporate partner. What you almost never hear ESPN do, anyone, is chastise Roger Goodell and the commissioners in the same manner that they will go after an athlete, and particularly a black athlete.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. I have spent the last month going through and piecing together, trying to find any time in ESPN's history where they've sided with a player on a labor dispute. And I am now into the early 90s. I started from 2021. I am now into the early 90s and I haven't found it. Like
not on a labor dispute. I mean, we saw the collective bargaining agreement how silent everyone was, how silent the media was. I think maybe one person in Sports Illustrated, I'm trying to remember who, was somewhat fair, but it was incredible how much misinformation sports media was going on a collective bargaining agreement that Eric Reed was speaking out, which also is contributing to his blackballing.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, quite frankly, gutting the disability benefits of retired players. And to be a little more specific about that is that you used to have to go through Social Security to decide if you had a disability. Now the NFL is making you go through them. So they're taking money away from people with concussions, from people with bad knees who could no longer work. So it's a travesty. And Eric Reed was bringing light to that. And you don't see people coming out, and certainly not in labor disputes. I think one time Michael Wilbon called Goodell gutless, and it might have been after the Philadelphia wide receiver that said the N-word and whatnot. And now it shocked me. That's the only reason I remember it. But it's few and far between.
Yeah, they're definitely always punching down. We were talking about, those players that are facing this now. I just want to get your quick thoughts on a player who could be facing this when their rookie contract runs out, and that's your thoughts on Justin Jackson. What treatment do you think he'll receive when he becomes a free agent and this rookie contract's over? I mean, I know it's speculation, but I mean, at the same time, it's like, do you think,
these things are often tied to performance? I mean, you think these things are often tied to performance. If you're an elite athlete, all right, you're gonna get a longer rope to war leeway, but you have to remain elite because people want you to win. I think an example of that, and not that this is not an example of someone who was a sports activist, but Terrell Owens certainly could have played a few years after he was cut, and they just deemed he was too much of a headache, and wasn't as elite anymore. And that goes for sports activists as well. You have to stay elite, and that's often the answer.
I'm always been curious about him because his level of activism has been really welcome. It's been welcome to see. It's like we're seeing that first new young wave of politically aware and motivated athletes. And at the same time, you don't hear much about it. Ownership, Chargers ownership is not that one. Chargers ownership is definitely mute on that, really. I mean, I haven't heard a lot. You don't know the feathers that he's ruffling. You don't know and so I'm just always kind of if insight on that and thoughts on that, because it's going to be really interesting to see what happens when that rookie deal is up. Yeah. I mean, right now I think it's almost like the silence doesn't call attention to it. Yeah. Their thought process is that he's under a rookie deal. It's not like he costs us a ton of money. Yeah. If we make any sort of case out of this, we're just going to draw people to it or draw attention to it. And,
But, there you go. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead, Chuck. Go ahead.
No, you got it.
Oh, I was just going to add to it real quick before you go. Let's not forget he's a running back, right? Not a quarterback. And then he's not taking a knee during the national anthem, right? He's taking on Bernie Sanders type progressive politics. Yeah. I don't know. Chuck, I don't know what your take is, but that's might be.
No, I mean, you're right. There is a whole lot of dynamics that go into it. The kneeling was getting into something deeper. I mean, media reframed the kneeling around the military, which was nonsense because he was never talking about the military. He was certainly talking about police, and he was quite obvious about that. So that should have been the discussion, not, what about the military? And that's what ESPN would have a panel of people talking about the military. It was ridiculous. Yeah. And it's hard to say, but that was the crime. The crime was standing up for racial justice. So it depends on what you're advocating for. And I think the third rail is almost always Free Palestine, though that's starting to change a little bit. You know, but I even know that I was banned from Twitter for 5 days after covering Free Palestine rallies. Now I've done that for many years, but you know, we're hitting at a point where it's maybe coming out of the shadows that some places that you wouldn't hear talk about Free Palestine. They're talking about it for the simple fact that we have cell phone videos and people can't deny the videos that they're watching. So I think, you know, it's hard to say. You have to hit me back in a couple of years.
Okay, facts. All right. Yeah. We could just get into your background a little bit, because I know you've been at the New York Daily News and then at Deadspin, and you know, I don't know, I know you're with Deadspin still, but maybe if you don't mind, I don't want to get into the writing, but you know, the takeover of Deadspin has been talked about a lot, the way that was changing, what Deadspin was when it first kind of came about in terms of adversarial sports journalism, really, you know, digging deep into issues that, like, we know the ESPNs of the world aren't. And then also the sports media landscape now. We've seen that with like the papers kind of dying down. You were at the New York Daily News, and The Athletic has really emerged as a big player, but you know, behind the paywall, and it's really kind of like pretty much just been like the landing spot, it seems like, for so many of these kind of like mainstream normie sports journalists to sort of land. And just kind of wondering what your take is in terms of the Athletic, ESPN, but also what Deadspin was originally and kind of how that's evolved. And just
I took a lot of crap for going to Deadspin. I don't know if you're aware of that.
Yeah.
I took a lot of crap, and I took a lot of crap from people I respect, and people who I respected said, I don't respect you. You're a cutting the strike line. What do you call it? Scab, right? That. And so it was actually all BS. And I'm glad you bring it up, even though I wasn't really planning to go there. There are 3 iterations of Deadspin. The first iteration, and when I was blogging under a few sites, but I started a site called Co-Sellout at the time. And I was blogging, and Deadspin was the big dog. It was Deadspin and Big Lead, right? They were the big dogs. If they linked to you, and this is the Wild Wild West days, 2006, 2007, if they linked to you, your stuff would sort of blow up. And what's my man's name? Help me out, his last name. The guy who used to run Deadspin, it's escaping me. But they were trash. Let me just tell you, they were racist, sexist, straight up trash. They were the Barstool Sports before Barstool Sports. Barstool Sports basically took that old Deadspin and took it to another level. Somewhere around 2012, 2013, Deadspin starts to change. They change. They get much better. They stop with the racism and the sex. They don't stop with it, but they take a turn, and I think a turn for the better, because I was a huge Deadspin critic. And they make a turn for the better. Now you're seeing some more progressive articles, and you're seeing things like that. But I still they always had a problem, is that they didn't tend to hire black writers. But let me put that aside. The white writers, they were hiring, they were progressive, but that's always been a problem with them. So I hear, and you hear, about this walkout, okay? And I pumped my fist when I first heard that. I pumped my fist, and I was like, yes, da 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 da. And you know, months later, you know, I get a call. You want to work at Deadspin? And I'm like, nah, you know, that's my first reaction. And I say, well, I was told to dig a little deeper. So I dig a little deeper, and I did my research. I did a lot of research. And the first thing you have to know is that it was a walkout. Okay, the team walked out. There wasn't negotiations. There was no picket line. No one cut anything. That for 4, 5, 6 months, nothing was happening. So what you're saying is, you have a place where someone will allow me to write what I write, and there are very few places that will allow me to write what I write, by the way, and is amenable to that. And if you want to leave it, but no one else could have it, that's what you're saying. No one else could have it. And I had a problem with that. When I started doing the research, what I saw is that Barry, basically, he defied a directive not to put certain articles up. He did. He got fired. And the rest of the team in solidarity said, you know what? We're going out with Barry. We're out of here. And on some level, I respect that. I mean, on some level, I respect, you know what? If you have a colleague and they get fired, you go out and you do that. But that was your personal choice, right? And here's the other thing. This is the first time I'm ever talking about this, by the way, because I've gotten crushed on Twitter because I don't have space. Here's the other thing. Most of those individuals went to other corporate media outlets with more restrictions than they had at Deadspin. And the reason they left, right? The reason they left, they said, we couldn't write whatever we wanted at Deadspin. That's why they left. You know, there were some pretty nonsense articles like, "Can I F to my best friend's band?" I mean, this is what we're talking about. And they left over that. Now, I didn't have that right when I was at New York Daily News to write whatever I want. If you go to any sports outlet, you don't have the right to write whatever you want. So yeah, they literally had the outlet that had the most leeway and the most latitude in the entire sports industry to write whatever they want. And when there was some curbing against that, they left on their own volition. Now, if you're saying my class solidarity is to stand with you on that decision, I saw privilege in that. I saw privilege because my class solidarity is going on the DC streets for doing free journalism and going up to individuals fighting against police brutality who are being shot at, who are being tear gassed, and asking them, why did you come out here today? And I'm doing it for $0 an hour, yet your definition of class solidarity is the ability for a certain privileged class who only have access to this space to say, I can't write whatever I want, so I'm leaving. And I have so much access and privilege that I could find a job at a new corporate outlet. That's not my definition of class solidarity. It's my first time speaking about this because I've taken so much crap and I just shut it down because Twitter is not the space. It's not the space to have this type of discussion. But I took heat from people I love and people I like. And a couple people actually called me, who had the decency to call me, and I tried to explain the whole thing. Well, then it's a little bit different. And so I wasn't planning to go in on that, but it's important because we have to understand when we talk about class struggle, we talk about class solidarity. It's got to be a multiracial struggle, first of all. It can't be a class struggle for a certain privileged group. Okay, so it's going to be a multiracial, if your journalism is about class struggle, then it's about your journalism. So if class struggle it's writing about the collective bargaining agreement of players and disabilities, that's what you do. That's your journalism. It is not being able to write whatever you want, whenever you want, and if you don't, you walk off.
No, man, the elitism is just astounding. I mean, it's like the idea that like you're up there in Manhattan or like wherever the offices are, and that name is Will Leach, right? Or Will
Will Leach. So that was the first iteration. That was the first iteration.
Yeah.
You know?
and it was all totally framed, right? It's like this was like the class solidarity, the walkout, and it's like, what are you fighting for? You're right. What are they doing? What kind of organizing work are they doing in terms of like, bringing people from oppressed nationalities and different oppressed communities like under this system together? No, they're talking about like writing, like you said, to have a forum to write a lot of like, nonsense. And like, that's like, it's such like a narrow, like petty bourgeois notion of like freedom and what class solidarity looks like. And I think that I really appreciate you like articulating it like that.
And I will say this, I did like a lot of their articles. I will say this, I did like a lot of their articles. So I'm not knocking, a lot of their content. A lot of their content was good, but it was more that it was portrayed like breaking a picket line. I would never cross a picket line in my life. I'll go broke before I cross a picket line. There was no picket line. It didn't exist.
Yeah. It's like, let's follow our homie. Let's follow our homie out who we like and then say it's a picket line. It's like, that's just not the same thing.
There was none. It's not the same thing. One is quitting a job. And here's what's interesting, and I know we're spending a lot of time on this. So I work with New York Daily News. It's important, particularly in this industry. When people are being cut and fired by 50 and 100, go to Vice News, where some of the former Deadspin went. Then they cut 100 people. Okay, so what's the difference now? When Tronk bought the New York Daily News and cleaned house, including the editor,
cleaned house,
who's now at Deadspin, who left and went to Deadspin. There wasn't one article from my editor, one of the very few black sports editors in all of America. You didn't hear anything saying, "Oh my God, Tronk got rid of this black editor." So what's the difference when a private company comes in and fires you, or you choose to walk off in an industry where everyone's getting fired? No one's articulated, that difference to my satisfaction. And we're in a tough industry. So here's where I end up landing. I'm going to write a certain way. You see how I write, right? I'm going to write a certain way, what I believe to be the truth. If you're a outlet that will accept my writing as it is, then that's okay with me. That's okay with me. There's no perfect outlet in this sports media industry. I'm not sure where that is. Point me in that direction, because I don't know where it is. Everyone is owned by a big corporate outlet if you want to get eyes on your work. Yeah, I could write a Medium, but
Yeah. No, I mean, we live in a capitalist system, and these people that think that like just you can transform shit through like hey, look, we need to organize within every workplace, but the idea that somehow the revolutionary change in society that's going to change the power dynamics that have to change in order for that space to open up to have like real working class journalism. Because at the end of the day, the people that own the means of production in this society are people that don't want like working class like journalism coming from, or as you refer to it as, and maybe this is a good transition, but maybe talk about how you got into it. You refer to it as emancipatory journalism, and how it's sort of, maybe that's at the root of like why they're have this sort of antagonism towards you. Is it like they fundamentally don't even understand what that's all about? And why it's important, and maybe you could help, educate people on what that's all about.
No, well, thanks. It's a good question. I get called even in complimentary terms. I'm told I'm an advocacy journalist a lot, right?
Yeah.
And you could argue I am, but my argument is every single journalist is an advocacy journalist. It's just, what are you advocating for? If you turn everyone on TV, they're advocating for privilege and power. If I could watch TV for 10 years straight and they won't have any anti-war guests after we drop a bomb, well, then you're advocating for war. When I see Brian Williams, who's allegedly a straight person, and he's saying the beautiful bombs that were dropped in Syria, and he's gushing, I'm like, you're a pro-war journalist. And when it's the norm that you are advocating for privilege of power, you're considered quote unquote objective. And I would argue the definition of objectivity itself in journalism is a function of white supremacy. It's built that way, because if you actually go into movement journalism, emancipatory journalism, justice journalism, there are many words you could use for it. And you go to the black press, say from the anti-slavery press, or like Frederick Douglass, to Ida B. Wells, who was talking about lynching, which is the predecessor of police lynching today. Ida B. Wells didn't look for two sides to lynching. Frederick Douglass didn't look for two sides to slavery. If you want to get into sports writing, when you're talking about the Pittsburgh Courier, you're talking about Sam Lacey, also at the Baltimore Afro-American, and what's my man's name at the Pittsburgh Courier? Wendell Smith. And then you talk about Lester Rodney, as well, writing for the New York. What's the name? Well, you have these writers, and they're not saying.
Hey, Chuck, I'll just throw in there just to suggest, check out Bill Rhoden's book, and you'll get the whole rundown.
Exactly. Go ahead. And the Pittsburgh Courier is saying, no, this is wrong. Baseball should be integrated. Black players, we're seeing them whoop ass in barnstorming games. You're wrong. And the white press, outside of the sprinkle here,
it's sprinkle fine. There, it is what it is. I mean,
and that's what happened. So they advocated for it. So you're advocating for power. So anyone who says they're an objective journalist is so blind to their own bubble and privilege around them that they don't see it. There's someone named Raven Wallace who recently wrote a book, A View from Somewhere, and everybody has a view. So I think what the honest thing to do is to say, this is my view, and I could base my view off objective facts. So if I say outright, I am against policing, that I believe policing in America are a gang, are terrorists, and will not put their own murderers in jail, I can document that and show you facts of why I'm right. I'm going to defend that position. And I think that's honest, and I could honestly do that. And I think that's very different than running and getting a police statement when you know they're professional liars, when you know right after they kneeled on George Floyd's neck for 9 minutes that they put out a false statement saying he died of medical injuries. We know when Walter Scott was murdered and shot in the back, before the video came out, they did a police statement with a whole pack of lies, conspiratorial. The partner was in on the lie, and they said he grabbed the taser. So we have a profession of liars. Why should I honor that profession and ask them for a statement? To me, the biased person is asking the professional liar for the statement.
Right. And and it's evidence-based and proven. Just look at it in North Charleston, South Carolina. The Walter Scott thing's a perfect example. I mean, there's so many of them we can just run down. But the reality is, when your solidarity is based on the thin blue line, and the thin blue line being based on the idea that because let's look at it. I mean, if you're in that business, and there's been like people that have actually left the profession of policing, like people like, I mean, I know from being an athlete, there's guys that like aren't very political, that like, just sort of like, it's a job, and it's like, you're kind of think you're doing, they have no illusions about it, but it is what it is. They go in there. If you break that code of silence, I mean, you literally could have people coming after you for like years. And it's like, the idea is that's where their solidarity lies. It's like in standing and defending the indefensible, right? And if that's your solidarity and that's the hill of objectivity you want to die on, man, bump that. I'm not with that. And that's not the kind of objectivity anybody that's actually trying to transform any kind of shit in this world needs to try to strive for, and it's like, it kind of reminds me, I don't want to get too into this right now, but this whole TYT thing, I don't know if it caught your radar a little bit, that with Cenk Uygur and how he's kind of like, I mean, it's just unbelievable to me that like this Russiagate stuff, and this, like, you can sit out there and just constantly in society say people are paid by Russians, right? People are, paid, they're just paid by this because you're doing anti-war journalism, right? That's not, that's critical, and then you're not, there's a reason that, like, Max and Ben and Anya, the Gray Zone, they're not on like MSNBC, CNN. It's because
you're not going to be
their journalism is.
I've seen them out in the street. I've seen Max out in the street. I've seen Anya out in the street when there was protests against Venezuela. I didn't see mainstream people out in the street. Yeah. The only mainstream person I saw was Jesse Jackson. The only one I saw was Jesse Jackson standing up when we were trying to invade. Have a coup in Venezuela. So I think we have anti-war and the anti-police. It's the same exact piece, just going from domestic to national and international, and we know they're connected. I wanted to say a word about the word emancipatory journalism that you used, and I first learned that from Dr. Jared Ball, who you talked about earlier, and who I ran into this week, and he discovered off someone in the 90s, Dr. Hemant Shah. He talked about the features of emancipatory journalism. I'm not going to get into all of them, but one thing is critically important. The way journalism is set up, it has a person in leadership as positioned as the expert, a general of the military, a police officer, a politician, all professional liars who all have incentive to lie, like politicians. They're going to lie. Like, why would someone invite Kellyanne Conway on there? I mean, why? Why are you doing that? Well, tell me what you're thinking. But even if you're not, why are you inviting Joe Biden? He's going to lie too. They're all going to lie. Why would I put someone in power and say their opinion is right? So emancipatory journalism has the opposite view. It says the person on the street is the expert. And if I interview someone on the street, you're more likely to get closer to the truth. That doesn't mean someone on the street can't lie, but if I interview 10 people on the street, I can get closer to the truth. And what I often get when I interview people on the street is, wow, I haven't heard that on TV. Well, it's not that no one on TV has the ability to articulate that thought. It's that anyone on TV, if they were articulating that thought, they wouldn't be on TV. They wouldn't have been invited to the panel. And that's the whole problem. You have to curb your truth. So it says a recipient of racism is a better expert on racism. A recipient of sexism is a better expert on sexism. A recipient of police brutality is the best person to talk to about the impact of police brutality. So those are the experts. And we've said their voices don't matter. And those people inflicting the police brutality, we make them the experts. So it's turning the entire field of journalism on its head, which is the correct way, in my opinion.
Yeah,
and in the spirit of an Ida B. Wells.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first journalist that I ever really was like awoken by was Robert Fisk. 25 years ago. But he's been saying it for all the way up until, we lost him last fall, but, he said it all the way up until his death, which is, I see the same journalists in the green zone. I see the same journalists getting breakfast in the hotel. I see the same journalists from all these places doing all these things. But then when I head out into Syria and I meet with people, I don't see them anymore. When I head out and I go to the front lines, I don't see them anymore. And when you do see them, they were helicoptered in by like a battalion. I mean, up until the man's death, he was still like bartering for like rides from people to get places, to get to the front of, you know, a spot, you know. I mean, it's just, it's amazing, you know, and you know, and then the work you do, the work Max does, the work that the people do to do that here, you know. Don't even get me started on, you know, Bellingcat has their own reporter that does this apparently. I don't know if you know, but he tweeted something about making $400,000 last year. So clearly I feel like he's not an asset at all. And he's just an upstanding, you know, but it's amazing to me how this model, right, isn't seen by more, and how this model of we always go to the first person who's going to lie to you to get whatever we're trying to get. Yeah. Because it has to come from an authoritarian structure, or else what was it? You know what I mean? Did you kick him out?
Now on the phone, man. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Did you
sorry, the thing just wasn't working anymore. I know mine.
I think you kicked Chuck out.
Oh no.
We lost Chuck. There he is. He's back.
I'm back. We got cut off.
Technical difficulties.
Yeah, I'm on the phone now, man. I was like, I won't even get into what happened. It makes me mad at myself.
It's all good.
Yeah.
You see, I sidestepped the TYT stuff. I just, you know.
Hey, I don't blame you, man.
Sidestep it all you want. I've spent most of my adult life not knowing who they are, and you know what? I like it. I like it this way.
Yeah.
Oh, good. So, anyways, like, I kind of wanted to pivot though, because you know, we had this stuff this week, and you know, I'm just wondering, like, what your thoughts are. This Carl Nassib stuff, I mean, obviously, I think it's good, and I think that, like, you know, it should be, you know, the people, it shows progress. But I'm wondering if, like, I mean, maybe I'm alone on this, but like, I feel like that there's a lot of it's genuine. A lot of it growth is genuine and whatnot. But I feel like a lot of the statements seem to be like, you know, awfully. I haven't been in locker rooms myself. I think there's a lot more struggle that needs to go on with it. And it's sort of like, there's a lot of like PR kind of like consultants that sort of like tell people what to say. And it like, you know, it's sort of like, but it's good. I'm not trying to be overly critical. I'm just saying that, like, I think that the way stuff is covered, it's almost covered as if like we've made so much progress. And now we're like, we're like, let's celebrate that. Let's celebrate how great everything is. The NFL is, and look at Roger Goodell coming out and, like, you know, talking about how much. I mean, like, when you look at like the way like trans people are treated, you look at the way the LGBTQ community, working class LGBTQ people are treated. The NFL doesn't give a damn about any of them. You know, it's like, this is a propaganda piece in a lot of ways for them. And look, I mean, Carl Nassib, I got no beef with. I mean, I remember him solely from being on Hard Knocks, really, and talking about like being Mr. Financial Advisor.
Yeah,
you know,
that was a good segment.
Yeah. So hey, nothing with Carl Nassib, man. Like, you know, to do your thing. I
got to give him credit, because it probably took a lot of courage to do so. Yeah. And I had to be the first one, because now that you're putting your finger in there, you're testing the temperature of what's going on, we're going to see that. And so I think the next few months, particularly once people hit the locker rooms, and by the way, he shares a locker room with Richie Incognito, I might add. Yeah. We'll see how that plays out. Once you see how that happens, and if it goes well, then I think you might see a domino effect, okay?
Right.
If it doesn't go well, then it might be a different story. But let's start with this. He became the highest selling jersey overnight. Kaepernick could do that by 100, by the way. So there could be initial revenue in there, and everything, most of everything that the NFL operates on is revenue more than putting the best players on the field. So I think the answer remains to be seen. We will not know for a while, and I'll just wait.
Yeah,
just sitting here and wait.
Yeah, because Justin, I know you want to hop in, but I'm just saying it's not going to be anything anyone says out loud inappropriate. That's what I'm saying. I don't want to sound like I'm being like just overly critical. It's just that, like, if you're not skeptical of what the NFL is about, you know, then you're thinking, hey, I don't know what to tell you, you know, because you look at coaches, they'll never come out and say it. It's always going to be couched in terms of like that, you know, we don't want to bring necessary distractions in the locker room. You know, it's like, I don't want to deal with this. I don't have a problem with it, you know, and then the standard answer I hear a lot is always like, look, you do what you do behind closed doors, nobody talk about, can you help us win games, And it's like, look, I mean, on some level, like, that's not the worst I take. I mean, if you're like sincere about it, but I think that's almost become like almost like a PR consultant kind of like line to throw out there. But yeah, Justin, why don't you hop in?
Yeah, I mean, the steps are awesome. This for him is awesome. The show of the jerseys is awesome. What the NFL will do with this will be pernicious, but that's what they do. You know what I mean? Like they will find a way to embrace this. It's kind of like, like had this been baseball instead, they would have found a way to embrace this, but still never talked about Glenn Burke. Like, I mean, it's that sort of thing, right? Like they'll step on the past to get to the thing they want out of it. But that doesn't downplay what this means for him, for the community, for everything else. It's just, it's no different than all of the things that the CIA put out their recruiting video are all good things. That the CIA wants to promote them doesn't make those things bad. The CIA is still bad. Like they're riding in on the wave of these things, trying to, milk it for whatever they can. And the NFL will do this, but the NFL is going to do that with anything. I mean, if they can capitalize on it, they're going to. So yeah, I mean, it's you can definitely be skeptical about how the NFL will treat this for what they're treating it for, but it doesn't hurt the issue. It doesn't hurt the, no different than, like I said, the CIA saying, come work for us because we have diversity.
Woke feminism, man.
Which I can never talk about diversity without bringing up the fact that diversity without a diversity of thought is optics, and that's all they care about. Anyway, everybody's on the same team.
You should call it diversity without policy,
yes.
because that's really what we're talking about.
Right.
Condoleezza Rice helped invade Iraq. So I mean, you have to call it diversity without policy, and then we're making it clear, because I do believe, when there's the diversity of thought, then identity and diversity has great value. But the policy has to be there. Without the policy, is just shadiness.
Right. Yeah. If it's just identity alone and representation alone, that's what we get with Condoleezza Rice or Kamala Harris, or just like kind of like, let's just, use this as a way to couch our, just sort of camouflage our the shitty politics we're already going to push forward. And that's not, but you're right. Diversity of thought, representation is important, but it's got to be in tandem, right? It can't just be in isolation. But, I don't know, Justin, we talked about wanting to get in. I kind of wanted to just quickly on a sports note. I mean, as someone, a former athlete and started with degenerative disc disease and back problems and surgeries and, it's a fact of life. And part of that, what forced me to keep playing through pain was like that mentality, no pain, no gain. You got to, and just like, if you're not, pain is just weakness leaving the body type shit, and, it kind of reminded me, watching this whole discourse of the Ben Simmons meltdown, just mental health with athletes in general. And that ties into injuries. You also hear a lot now with the NFL changing its tone about cannabis, and Toradol is a big thing. Chris Long was actually talking about this recently, and I think Chris Long is a pretty dope cat.
He's a good dude.
Yeah. And he was speaking out like about how he couldn't play the last few years in the league without Toradol. He said one guy in the training or whatever was like, we don't do that. Team doctors say, you need to get the coach in here because Chris Long doesn't play. Like, Toradol, But that's just a testament to the reality of it, but I just wonder whether they see you have the injury aspect, the mental health aspect, and where we are in sports, because I don't know what's happening. Ben Simmons, to me, I can't explain that kind of meltdown other than the fact that you build up this huge venue. I mean, it doesn't make any rational sense, kind of, and maybe that's just that's one case, but and then you get on the Fanatic. I was listening to sports radio the day after, and the typical type stuff. I mean, it's just insane, and he deserves criticism. But I'm just wondering what your take is, health in sports, mental health in sports, and any of those.
I felt a little bad for Ben Simmons. I mean, he's only 24 years old. I know it sounds shocking. It seems like he's been in the league for a while, and he would be older than 24. But let's put that in perspective, okay? He's 24 years old, And in his early years, 2021, 22, 23, he got into play in the confidence building mecca of Philadelphia. Like literally the worst fan base. I'm a native New Yorker, and we probably got the second worst. So the worst fan base ever. And we saw Markelle Fultz, how he left Philadelphia and did well. So we have a young man who obviously has confidence issues. We know it's in his head. How do we know that? Because he shot 61% from the free throw line in the regular season, but now is shooting 33% in the playoffs. So his head is not right. He's afraid to shoot. He's afraid to mess up. And so there's some there. And I believe he's so talented. I mean, his defense is impeccable. He could pass. He could rebound. He does everything else but shoot well.
Right.
That if he went to a small market team where there's a more forgiving fan base who let you grow, I think he could be an incredible player and still work on his shooting. He has to work on his shooting. There's no question about that in the offseason. But there's something psychological going on. And as long as that psychological thing is going on, I think Philadelphia is the worst place for him. So I can see him thriving elsewhere. Now you went out. So as they try to come back in, we can continue to talk a little about Ben Simmons. Oh, there you are. There you are.
Oh, all right. Good. Dang, man. I was literally going on the phone here, and then
it's all good.
Sorry about that, man. It's like I hit the wrong button. That was it. Then I was sitting there. Yeah, appreciate it. Go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was just saying Ben Simmons' confidence has been shattered. We see that. And, you know, I'm empathetic towards him. Now, Philadelphia's not an empathetic town. Sports fans aren't empathetic. Twitter is brutal. Even when a player plays well, Twitter is brutal. We saw Paul George score 9 critical points, and all anyone remembers is the last 2 free throws. And if he didn't score those 9 points, there would be no free throws to talk about. So Twitter and sports media as a business model is based on hate. So we have to start right there. That you know, hate is what drives ratings.
Right.
And so there's incentive to hate. There's incentive to be a Skip Bayless and hate on LeBron every second. And underneath that hate works best against black players. It has a bigger currency against black players. So even if you're not necessarily saying anything racist, I would argue Skip Bayless's career is inherently based on racism because his treatment of LeBron could never work with a white player. It could never work with Aaron Rodgers. If Skip Bayless was dogging Aaron Rodgers the way he does LeBron for the last 15 years, people would say, hold up. Hold up. They wouldn't give you better ratings. So the hate culture is part of all sports, but it has a greater currency with black athletes. And, you know, we see that on Twitter. We see that in basketball. And even in basketball, you know, I don't think we saw like Steve Nash I love Steve Nash. Let me tell you, on and off the court, love the dude.
Yeah, I do too.
We didn't see him get maligned for not making the finals in the same way we saw Carmelo Anthony, or we see any black player who can't make the finals. He's holding back his team. He's not good for them. We don't see that. So I always have a problem with the hate culture because I always feel there's an undertone of racism, the Skip Bayless racism. And at the same time, that you throw in the hypermasculinity when we're talking about, you know, Ben Simmons. You know what? Let's just say this. If Ben Simmons had a knee injury, you'd be like, oh, he has got a knee injury, right? He's pulled a hamstring, like Mike Conley, like James Harden, even though they're critics, those injuries too. But I think there needs to be a point to say he lost his confidence. Now, when I said this on Twitter, everyone said, it's a tough town. You got to get over it, What if we help Ben Simmons become better? Like, wouldn't you want that as a fan?
Yeah.
Isn't that what we want?
I mean,
why wouldn't we want to make a path for Ben Simmons to realize his almost unlimited potential?
You know what it is? Tearing people down makes these fans who otherwise might not have any power in their life and most of them don't really in a meaningful way, but they feel a sense of entitlement that they lost something, right?
Keep going.
Yeah. And that sense of loss basically is now they found a vehicle to find a sense of empowerment that's not really tethered to anything that's really connected to power, but it makes them feel that way. You call into the fanatic in Philly and you go off on Ben Simmons, it's like a sort of a, it's cathartic. It's like you're releasing something. All the anger in your life, your girlfriend is mad at you, whatever else is going on is out the door suddenly, right? And I think that we'd be lying if we didn't throw anything in. I mean, you get that group of fans that go, well, if I think it's pretty easy. If I were 6'10" and was athletic enough to run the point guard, I would just learn how to shoot. And they think they made a good point. And you're like, again, you're missing so much. Anyway, the first thing I do every year when NBA 2K comes out is I go ahead and trade Ben Simmons to the Pistons. So Ben, if you're listening, come up to Motown, man. Number 1 overall pick. Add you. There's no pressure.
You're a Pistons fan?
Look, yeah. You
got the number 1 pick, and my wife's a Pistons fan too. So, how do you feel about Cade?
I feel good. I feel good. I feel like that's it. It's the thing that I have with Detroit though. Like I gotta bring this back to the politics of it really quick, and that is that I didn't want to gloat about the number 1 pick. Nate saw my tweet the other night. It was just simply pointing out the fact that Detroit again was the fastest growing city on earth for 40 years. They've had the largest black middle class in any place on earth. And racist capital tore that city apart. So I just always like to just bring that back.
But you got the number 1 overall pick, Justin. So fan, none of that matters. It's just we got the number 1 overall pick, and we lost something, right? And capitalists are screwing people over. And
there's no tax base to pay for infrastructure, but hey.
It's wild, man. I mean, I know you got to roll in a minute, but I really wanted to ask one last thing, man. It's about Kwame Brown stuff. I've been finding this interesting. You could parse some things about, his rough around the edges language and some, different stuff like that. But I really think it's kind of like cool to see someone who just has nothing to lose his whole life. He tags himself and wears that old bust life kind of on his YouTube channel and just calling out these people you can tell he's not trying to get into sports media. He doesn't have an angle. But to me, it just strikes me as some dude who's just sick and tired of being just trash talking. He's like, dude, I was the number 1 overall pick, verbally abused by Michael Jordan in Washington. I stuck around, played in the NBA for 12 years. What is it about our culture, about tearing down black men and tearing down, and white supremacy that takes so much joy almost and laughing and making fun of Kwame Brown. And I think, I don't know, I'm just wondering what your take is on kind of him, fighting back, for lack of a better.
I have a take on Kwame Brown because I actually went to Wizards games his first couple of years when Jordan was there in DC. So I went to those games. So I'll get to that in a second. But I don't like sports media. To me, Skip Bayless is everything that's wrong with sports media. Everything that's wrong. And in many ways, you could throw Stephen A. in there in the sense that there's this denigration, Colin Cowherd. There's this denigration of athletes. Why would I denigrate Kwame Brown? I can't play in the NBA. I can't do what he does. I suck. I played in high school. I never played in college. Who am I to denigrate someone who could play far better than I can? That's ridiculous. So the meaning, denigrating language that we see in sports media are people who never played at the highest level. And I'm not saying they're not some ex-players who cross the line. That happens sometimes. But generally speaking, you're telling me you don't have respect for the game. You don't have respect for what these athletes have to do when you denigrate athletes at the highest level or what Kwame Brown can or cannot do or what this athlete can or cannot do. And it's just disrespectful. And I will just never do that because I have too much respect for what these athletes are trying to do. And I think Kwame Brown said it best. He said, I'm a failure. I bought a home for my mother.
Yeah.
I paid it to, where I'm from. I bought a home for my mother. Since when is buying a home for your mother not successful? In what bubble do you live in that you think that this game is more important than buying a home for your mother? And LeBron James said it years ago after I think he lost one championship at the Dallas Mavericks in the finals. Yeah. He said, something's wrong with me. I'm not even supposed to be here. And you're saying I'm a failure? And then, of course, he went on and won a bunch of championships. Yeah. So it's ridiculous. Note on Kwame.
Yeah.
I was at the Wizards games. And I know he denied it recently, but all I saw every time out, I'm not making this up, is a tag team between Michael Jordan and Doug Collins screaming on this 18-year-old kid. He might say, now I was okay. I cannot see how that could have been good for an 18-year-old kid, because I saw him, as we talk about Ben Simmons, playing scared. I saw him as someone who's afraid to shoot. And I wonder if the 18-year-old Kwame had better development, had more nurturing development. Shoot it, you're going to make mistakes. It's all right. We're not going to make the playoffs right now. Would that have changed the rest of his career? I don't know. But I think those first few years, particularly when you're 18, they're big. And I just saw Doug Collins and Jordan screaming on him all the time.
No, that's just what it was. I mean, I bet you if he had to do over again, knowing the Wizards had the number one overall pick, he would have gone down to Florida with Billy Donovan for a year and then re-entered that draft to avoid being there with that fate. But, nonetheless, go ahead, Justin.
Absolutely. I mean, that's Tom Izzo behavior. I mean, just yelling on a kid and expecting them to
right, loving on him, right? Loving on him.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Threaten to punch him. That's always really good. Just threaten to punch an unpaid employee on national television, so a bunch of people like Skip Bayless can be like, he's got grit. He's a fiery coach with passion. He's just threatening physical violence. I just wanted to jump in really quick and go back here, because I wanted to get my little thing about the city of Detroit out, but I actually want to address it. No, we should draft Cade, but here's the thing. Mm-hmm. We took Darko Milicic when Dwayne Wade was still on the board. So
and Melo.
Yeah, and Melo. Yeah.
Who would have probably been the pick?
Yeah, it's one of those things where I will say that over the last, ever since that happened, that did allow me like a good 3-year span where I could go to whatever team Darko was playing for after that. I could go to a game where they were playing just to scream the words, "Put in Darko." Because, why not? The fans deserve to see that man play. Anyway.
Can I ask you a dumb question?
Yeah.
One of my favorite documentaries of all time. Did you see the 30 for 30 Bad Boys documentary?
Absolutely. I mean, there's only one embarrassing thing about it, and that's that Kid Rock narrates it. You could do so much better.
Right.
Iggy Pop's from, how take just a microcosm of just pick a random 50 musicians that you could just name. I bet 30 of them are from Detroit. Yeah. You know what I mean? You didn't think to get anyone from Motown. You didn't think to get Iggy Pop. You didn't think to get, I would have taken Bob Seger. Kid Rock? Yeah. Are you kidding? That's the only hard part about that.
Only flaw, but it was a great documentary.
It's so good to watch, and especially now I live in the extended, I'm going to call it the extended Chicagoland area. It's fantastic to just be around all these Bulls fans that just hated that team. And you can always bring up one thing, and you can always say to any Bulls fan, any Jordan fan really, and that's that you can hate us all you want, but the man said it himself. He never would have got there without us. So you're welcome that team existed, because how was he ever going to get over that hump if it wasn't for, he had to be broken to get stronger. And the Celtics weren't going to break him in the same way.
No,
you needed a team like Bad Boys to break him. Except for if you watch that, I gotta ask, because I feel like not many people pick up on this, but I always think it's fun to go back and watch this, especially with someone who's astute. When they talk about the expansion draft that broke up the two Bad Boys, and they bring that up, but did you bother to go back and look at that roster and go, there was a lot of guys you still could have made? That's the weirdest thing to me, is that it was kind of it was kind of framed. Oh man, now I got to bring up the roster.
You can't get rid of Vinnie Johnson.
No.
You can't get rid of Sally.
They said something about you could only protect, at that point, you could only protect 8.
So you got the 5. Then you got Rodman, Sally, and Vinnie Johnson, to my understanding.
Okay, so it was 8, not 10.
I think it was 8. So let's go down. You got Isaiah and Dumars in the backcourt. You want to throw it? Okay.
Yeah.
You got Lambeer.
Yeah. You keep.
Who are the forwards? You got Adrian Daly, right?
What about Mahorn?
I didn't get Mahorn yet. Well, hold on.
Yep.
Adrian Dantley, one of the forwards.
Yep.
Is Sally the forward? Is Sally or Rodman? One of them's coming off the bench. Or let's say it's Sally. Let's say that's a 5. Then you got Rodman in the backcourt. You got Vinnie Johnson coming off the bench.
Yep. Oh, what you got? Let's see.
There's someone else besides Mahorn that we might be forgetting.
I'm just 89's Piston roster.
Yeah,
right
you
now.
may have to go on the computer and
it was one of those things. I just remember like pausing that documentary and Googling it and looking at names and was like, I just remember one stood out as baffling, and I was like, wait, why did we what? Like, it just doesn't make any sense. They made it seem like it hurt so much that it had to be done when like you could have gotten rid of John Long or Pace Mannion.
I don't know if you're right, and I know this is not the best way to use the time of the show, but I'm insistent to figure this out, and in about a second I will. Okay, so I'm going to figure this out because I'm going to look up
Fennis Denbo, Steve Harris.
No. Okay, so you traded Mark Aguirre for Dantley mid season.
Yep.
You got Dumars. You got Vinnie Johnson, Sally, Isaiah. You might be right. There might be another 8th person. Maybe was it Fennis Dembo?
Like it was just I just remember like I said it was so emotional. It was so emotional, and I was like, but wait. I was also a kid. Like I was a child when this was happening, so it didn't make any sense to me. I was just like, oh, Rick Mahorn's gone. You know, like moving into that next year is just like, oh, he's gone.
Fennis Dembo was a rookie. It might have been Fennis Dembo. It's possible. You might be right.
It was just one of those things where I was like, well, that's weird. I mean, now it didn't work out. It didn't work out bad for the Pistons. Let's be honest. They won another title.
I got it.
Okay.
It's James Edwards. That's the one we were missing. And James Edwards was balling, if you remember. He would come in
the
as
Walrus,
a sub.
man.
And he would come in as a sub and hit these key, lovely little hooks and floaters. I don't know if it's floaters, but hooks. So I think it was between probably James Edwards and Mahorn, and they probably thought between Sally and Rodman that Mahorn was duplicative.
Yep. Yeah, and Rodman got to start after that. Like I said, it didn't work out badly. It was just one of those things that like they made it seem like they were doing that Julia Roberts meme where it's like, oh, the complex math is going on. And I was like, Fennis Denbo, easy. Like, protect Rick Mahorn. Get rid of this guy.
But
never heard of him.
But it was James Edwards. That's the difference. Yeah.
Gotcha.
I'm trying to make you feel better.
Yeah, no, you're good. You're good. You're good.
Giving you some therapy there, Justin. No charge, man.
Anyway, I mean. Yeah.
So I think we kept Chuck, a long time. I really appreciate the time. I mean, Justin, any last thing you want to ask before he rolls?
Oh man, I really wanted to get into John Thompson, but
throw John Thompson out.
All right, go ahead.
Yeah, I just if you could, speak a little bit about like what John Thompson like means to you, and what like. I read a little bit about how Georgetown basketball and growing up. So just if you could, I don't want to. I can keep here.
And how much you into this, John? Maybe too.
John Thompson's big for me. The reason I wanted to answer is that I actually grew up a Georgetown fan, even though I lived in New York City, and that was unheard of because everyone was a St. John's fan, back then. And I was a kid, and they had some ballers. You had Chris Mullin. You had Mark Jackson. People don't remember Walter Berry might have been the best of them on the team, but he only had a cup of coffee in the NBA with his Spurs. You had Wennington was the center there.
Bill Wennington,
Yeah, so, I mean, you had a team of pros and a couple of incredible pros in Mullen and Mark Jackson. So everyone was a St. John's fan, and I became a Georgetown fan because I had a subscription to Sports Illustrated, saw Patrick Ewing, and I said, I like them. And I just decided that I liked Georgetown out of nowhere. And I'm rooting for Georgetown. So every day my experience was walking into school. And then this was at this time was a predominantly white school. Everyone ganging up on me. Yeah. And what I realized is that it formed a bit of a racial development. I would say being a Georgetown fan and being a Patrick Ewing fan, which went past the life of it, it actually formed a little of racial development to see meanness and see racism. If you remember how bad Patrick Ewing was treated back in college, Ewing can't read. They called him a bunch of racist names. It was awful.
And Syracuse too, I think.
Ooh. Yeah. So he was treated awful. And Ewing was always reticent the rest of his career because of the damage that happened both in high school at Cambridge up in Boston and what happened at Georgetown. And it impacted him being vocal and not talking to press the rest of his career of how he was treated in such a manner. So I saw that. And then John Thompson, at that time, to have an all-black team, and Georgetown's a predominantly white school, was a big deal to the point that I remember going to school and other kids would say, John Thompson's racist. I'll say, why is John Thompson racist? Well, he has an all-black team. And at this point, most teams, they didn't have a lot of all-black teams. Now, you see that it's not a big deal. And so I would hear that all the time. Then when he would take some stands, you would hear that. And he was such a pioneer as far as he didn't care what anyone said about anything. He was going to do what he was going to do. And I love that, players went to the team. And you see he obviously had a knack, and he did well with centers. He did well with Ewing. He did well Alonzo Mourning. We're talking about Dikembe Mutombo. We're talking about Othella Harrington. I think someone more recently made the pros. Obviously, he had some good guards, Allen Iverson, the most noteworthy. But I think that's where, big men learned how to play defense. And then they became a greater scorer in the pros like Ewing. But, he's a giant figure.
No, absolutely. I mean, I remember that vividly, being a kid in the 90s, especially. You'd hear the stuff about, it just goes to show you just, how normalized the racism is. As a little kid, you don't realize that's what it is. But the idea of, that not so subtle, reverse racism discourse manifesting itself, and the idea that, he's a racist, totally devoid of any power dynamic analysis, of course. That's just the way, people do it in this country. But, he's a racist, right? I mean, at a school, it's just astounding. But it's not astounding when you really look at the history of the country and kind of where power rests. And anyways, Chuck, we really appreciate the time tonight, man. It was great having with you. And,
absolutely.
And I'm sure Mike wishes he could be here, but he's doing a lot of organizing work in Jacksonville, Florida right now. And they had some activism stuff they have to take care of. So we'll have to, down the road, have to do it again sometime and have to catch up with you in DC sometime. So
sounds
really
great. Thank you for having me. Thank you for having
absolutely.
Me. Thank you, Chuck.
All
appreciate
right.
it.
Yeah, take it easy. Peace.
All right. Yeah. All right. So Justin, what's up, man? I got a couple more minutes in me here, man. But,
I don't have much, man. We're losing to the fucking Pirates. And your screen just went wild.
Really?
Yeah, I can't. Anyone else? Can anyone else see Nate?
I don't know, man. I feel it's totally fine on my end.
All I see is wavy lines. Maybe I'll check the.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
Here, I'll just turn my cam off though. Let's close it out then.
Turn it off. Turn it back on. I got something real quick for you. Oh yeah. It's. Nope. Still doing it. Anyway.
Oh man.
I was just gonna throw out there, right? It's wild. What he was saying about Georgetown, and I think that a lot of people, if there's one thing for as normie as ESPN is, if there's one thing that the 30 for 30 series can do with getting a level of documentary director, and these aren't world breakers. Let's be honest. I mean, they're not out here trying to absolutely collapse the societal narrative or anything. Yeah, exactly. But at the same time, I think it's really, really important though that does exist, because I grew up a fan of the Fab Five as a kid, and it wasn't until I watched the 30 for 30 that I got to see just what I mean. Obviously, you'd have to live under a rock to know that they to not know that they face some sort of racial backlash. But at the same time, what they're able to get into, what they're able to show and share of what those players went through, so much more than the media covered, which is twofold, right? It's one, it's important these mediums exist now and you have a glimpse to be able to look in further. But more than that, it's an indictment on what our media will always fall short on, because they could have covered that when it happened.
Yeah,
anyway, that's all I'm going to throw out there. That's that proof of exactly what Chuck was saying, right? Where it's like they go to an authority figure and they get a statement and then they move forward,
right?
And claiming objectivity. When I remember when I was a kid, whenever I saw a Fab Five interview, it was always whatever would make them look stereotypical, whatever would make them look more or less intelligent. Like they would edit things around to just get the thing that they wanted. They didn't go to those kids to actually ask them what they thought.
No, of course not.
And never did they want that. So yeah, absolutely. But yeah,
that's not why they exist. As you always say, capitalism, right?
Yeah.
And anyways, man, well, as you see a nice little booming white, no-face version of myself there, I'm going to sign off, man. And
really quick, somebody said that we had some things definitely clarify that you were looking like that. And let's see, we had Mini Ninja called you spooky looking.
Dang, so when did that start?
Jeff said, nope, it's all blurred. But here's my favorite. Jeffrey also threw out, makes me think of the TV on the movie The Ring right before the girl comes out.
Whoa. Hey, all right. Hey, baby. So, when did that start?
It started after Chuck left. It started like right as we were about, right before I started on the Fab Five
Google
stuff.
Pixel phone right now after I left my. God, I just can't believe it, man. I think it ended up. What's wild is it sounds like what I was experiencing, not hearing Chuck did. It was coming through fine with y'all though on your end.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. The whole time,
yeah, man. Good deal.
Time.
So, look, man, the audience doesn't need to hear all this, so let's go ahead and wrap right now. And appreciate y'all coming out tonight. Really enjoyed talking to Chuck. Definitely follow his work at ChuckModi1 on Twitter. And we will be back next week. Check me out tomorrow on By Any Means Necessary with Sean Blackman. And also, again, condolences. Chuck Modi was referring to being at the funeral of Jackie Luqman's husband, Abdus, on Tuesday.
And lastly, I do want to just throw out really quick is that Mike wasn't able to join us today, and I don't want to pigeonhole people into what they do, whether it's prayers or good thoughts or whatever. But Mike's grandfather passed away, and that was today as well. So just keep Mike in your thoughts, and
All right. So we're out. Appreciate it, y'all. Peace.
Bye.